And its stock market crash of last week sent shockwaves around the world. One of the bubbles that some market commentators had warned about burst. Worse still, China's growth prospects are not what they used to be. But is this a short-term blip? Are we fussing for nothing? Or is there a real need to be concerned? Well, I have Ernie Lai King with me in studio. He's a partner and head of tax and Asia practice at law firm Hogan Lovells, who has a deep understanding of the workings of the Chinese economy. Thanks very much for joining us, Ernie.
Good evening, Nompu.
Now, Ernie, let's just look at what happened last week. You had a situation where what began as Chinese investors borrowing money and then betting on the stock market on stocks that already had high valuations, and then last week the bubble burst, there were losses on the market, and obviously they lost money, and there's a concern that they won't actually be able to pay the original debt that they accrued to buy those stocks. Were you surprised by this?
Not particularly surprised. If you look at Chinese investors and the opportunities and the range of instruments that they can invest in China, it's fairly limited. Property was one of them, and property, of course, there's been a little bit of a downturn on the property market. So equity shares was the next best thing. As far as China is concerned, China is quite a unique type of economy. It's very hard to pigeonhole China. So as Mark Twain says, the rumors of my death are exaggerated. There's always the doomsayers about China this and China that. The bubble was going to burst, the property this, property that. But China seems to have a remarkably resilient economy, which is, of course, backed up by the central government. So we'll wait and see. But so far, it seems like things are starting to recover. So we'll have to wait and see.
It's interesting that you say it's a unique economy and it's got a unique culture and so on. So one of the things that confused the markets was the Chinese government's intervention in the markets through its companies by buying up stocks.
Quite.
It seems as though to the Western world, or to those of us who are used to Western philosophy, there's a confusion between the government understanding its role as a command economy type of setup or approach, as opposed to free market, because that's what stock markets are.
Quite correct. The central government does play a central role in the economy. It's a planned economy. The state-owned enterprises play a very big role and have played a very big role in the growth of China's economy. But you'll see now that there's quite a concerted bid to try to allow private enterprise, private companies to come in more on their own, because previously there has been a concern that these huge state-owned enterprises crowding out private investment, and they're starting to make way for private investment. We're certainly seeing what we call the second wave. Generally, if you look at the world trend, the state-owned enterprises go in first to invest, and the second wave of private investment comes through later. And we certainly are seeing that.
Now, you're clearly quite optimistic about the Chinese story, but like you did say, there has been this speculation about the housing bubble. What's your perspective there?
I think the housing bubble was overheated. I mean, there certainly was a bubble. But, if you think there will be a problem like subprime, I doubt it. There won't be. It's far too controlled and planned economy.
Now, in the past, while commentators have agreed that China will have a slower growth trajectory because of its new development path, now obviously we've had the negative stuff in the headlines last week. Do you still think that it's going to have a soft landing as opposed to a hard landing? I
think so. I expect that there will be a soft landing. The South Africa, together with the rest of the BRICS countries, last week, in fact, formally launched the BRICS Bank, and it's a first step. It's quite an ambitious project. There's the New Development Bank and the contingency reserve arrangement, which is very interesting. The New Development Bank has initial capital of 50 billion. That's about 622 billion rand. Each country contributed 10 billion US. And then there's something called a contingency reserve arrangement of 100 billion US. And that allows the BRICS members to come to the aid of any member that has a balance of payment problem. So, for example, that would be useful for South Africa if we look at South Africa. If, for example, we get downgraded again and there's capital flight. So that contingency reserve arrangement would be an arrangement to assist South Africa. It's still small by world standards and global standards, but it's certainly a start. And it is certainly a very real political signal that the balance of, the status quo is not going to, it's changing. The balance of power is changing.
Now, you heard in my earlier conversation with Francis about this continual concern that in our relations with China, yes, things are skewed in their favour.
Quite right.
Now, you're a lawyer. You look at deals that are done between companies from South Africa and China. As you look at the way the deals are structured, do you see that changing? What's your impression of that?
My impression is that South Africa has been pretty good in negotiating their position because the Chinese come to do business. You always hear that China's coming to colonize the country. That's not true. They come to do business. They come to sign a contract, do business. And as in any business negotiation, you need to protect your own part of the field. And South Africa's been pretty good. If we look at the major locomotive deals, the railway deals, PRASA, Transnet, and the insistence that there must be 60% local content, I think that's admirable, and I think it must continue because it's obvious for South Africa that South Africa must see the economic benefits of the two-way trade. The two-way trade in 2014 was 262 billion. China is South Africa's biggest trading partner. South Africa is the biggest trading partner in Africa for China. And I think from what I'm seeing, there are some very large projects on the cards. We're involved in some very major projects bubbling along on the cards. And the particular institutions, the South African institutions, the IDC, the PIC, etc., the parastatals, I think they're very cognizant of making sure that South Africa negotiates a good position for itself.
Thanks very much for your time, Ernie. That was Ernie Lai King. He's a partner at Hogan Lovells. Over to Greece now.